Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we journey into the tangled green veins of the Central American jungle, where mist clings low and cicadas hum like anxious spirits. But this isn't just a bedtime story. No, tonight, I want you to imagine something different. You're not you anymore. You're 18, a hunter, a son, the proud heir to a flourishing Maya kingdom. Your skin is bronze from years under the southern sun. Your tunic stitched with the feathers of quetzals. Your father once gifted you. He is the aloud chief, the war leader, the wise one of your people, and you are running. The branches claw at your arms like desperate fingers. You tumble over roots, slick with moss, lungs burning, the air thick with incense and blood. Somewhere behind you, the men who murdered your father crash through the brush. Their obsidian blades caught the moonlight before they caught his throat. You didn't scream. You ran. But now, barefoot and breathless, you're not sure if you'll survive the night. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. My name doesn't matter anymore. But I was once known as Tess, son of Khan, chief of the White Flame village nestled between two rivers and a field of stone temples. We were one of many Maya cities that dotted the land like jewels each, with its own kings, priests, gods, and sometimes enemies. That morning, I had woken before dawn to hunt with my father. It was the sacred day of Cain, a lucky omen. The jungle was quiet, save for howler monkeys growling from the canopy. My father always said silence before a hunt was the jungle holding its breath. That meant prey was near. That meant power. But fate had other plans. When the strangers came, their faces were smeared with black ash, bodies inked with foreign sigils. They didn't speak. They just attacked. One of them grabbed my father's feathered headdress, tore it from his skull, and cut him down like a deer. He didn't even scream. I remember the blood steaming in the cool air, the crunch of sandal against bone, and the sound my own breathing made when fear turned it shallow and fast. Then I ran. As the sky grew darker, I scrambled into the hollow of a ceiba tree. The world slowed. I pressed my body against the gnarled trunk, trying to disappear. It smelled of damp earth and resin. I could hear the men moving through the underbrush, their voices low and wrong like they didn't belong in our world. But we did. Because we were Maya. We were the ones who built cities aligned with the stars. We measured time with calendars that still baffled modern minds. Our ball games could end in sacrifice. Our kings claimed descent from gods, and our cacao was so prized it was currency. Literal chocolate money. Imagine that. In our temples, priests read the movements of Venus and chanted numbers that danced in base 20 math. We didn't just count days, we listened to them. The long count calendar tracked eons. Time wasn't a line for us. It was a snake that ate its tail. Historians still argue whether the Maya were one great empire or a fractious patchwork of city-states. The truth is, we were both united in belief, divided by ambition. And my father, he ruled well. He kept peace. He grew maize and children. He offered blood to the gods when the rain stalled. And when I was old enough to shoot a blowgun with deadly aim, he taught me not how to kill but how to wait. That was his way. Watch. Think. Act. Last. But I had no time to wait now. Night was falling, fast and full. The forest turned blue and silver, shadows long and alive. I crouched under that tree for what felt like hours. My heart slowed. My hands stopped shaking. And that's when I saw, etched into the bark before me, almost glowing in the moonlight, a glyph. Old, possibly ancient, 4 dots over a bar. a symbol for the number 9. 19 kun. That was today! I'd seen the glyph before in the priest's codices. It marked a prophecy, one that warned of the fall of a great tree, an old metaphor for leadership. And as the son of the Yahoo, I suddenly realized something terrible. That glyph was for us. Historians still debate whether Maya prophecies were literal predictions or clever political tools used to manipulate the map. Either way, they had power. Real or perceived. What mattered was belief. And I believed. As the jungle quieted, I began to crawl. My muscles burned, but I moved silently, just as my father taught me. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. Away from the blood. Away from the ghosts. It's funny, we had temples to honor the gods, palaces for the elite, and schools for scrubs. But no one taught us how to survive when the gods stopped listening. I crossed a stream, waded past a sleeping crocodile, who thankfully had a full belly, and no interest in terrified boys, and found shelter under a fallen tree. There, I cried. Not loudly, but the kind of crying that starts in your chest and doesn't even need tears. Just tightness. Just silence. And then I slept. Or maybe I passed out. Either way, I dreamed of the city I had left behind. White flame. My mother's garden with its jaguar lilies. The market's scent of roasted maize. The laughter of children playing with clay figurines shaped like gods. All of it gone. Or burning. That night, as the jungle breathed and I lay hidden in the mossy dark, I made myself a vow. I would survive. Not just for me. For him. For my mother. For the unborn child that my wife now carried beneath her heart. But I didn't know yet that the story was bigger than me. Bigger than vengeance. Bigger than white flame. It was the story of an entire people. A civilization once brilliant, then broken. A story of gods, droughts, wars, wonders, and Yaia's betrayal. And it had only just begun. I wake with dirt in my mouth, and the dawn wrapped in fog. The jungle hums softly, like it's remembering. Insects buzz in layered tones, and above me, a parrot calls out a single, jarring note like an alarm. I blink slowly. Bones aching, skin damp, heart ... still pounding. I don't know how long I've slept. My sense of time's gone soft. All I know is I'm alone. My father is dead, and somewhere out there, his killers are likely hunting me or celebrating. But we're not there yet. Let's go back. Before the blood, before the glyph, before the betrayal. Back to White Flame. The city of my childhood. White Flame wasn't the biggest Maya city. We weren't tickled or Palenque or Copan, but we were proud, elegant, respected. Our stone pyramids didn't scrape the sky, but they shone white under the midday sun, polished smooth by generations of calloused hands. Every structure, every alley, every courtyard was laid with purpose, aligned with the stars, balanced with symmetry, dedicated to harmony. I remember running barefoot through temple corridors, the stone warm under my feet, the scent of copal incense thick in the air. Merchants barked their prices. Laughing children ducked under baskets, and the priests floated through the crowd like ghosts wrapped in jaguar pelts. My father walked like he belonged to the earth itself, calm, deliberate. The feathers of his headdress always swaying just slightly behind him. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, even parrots seemed to fall silent. He was not just a chief, he was a center of gravity, and I was his son, his only son. In the Maya world, lineage mattered more than anything. Bloodlines were sacred. Power wasn't just inherited, it was divine. Our kings claimed descent from the gods themselves. And if you could trace your ancestors back far enough, you didn't just rule by law, you ruled by right of heaven. Still, being heir to a city wasn't as fun as it sounds. My days were split between learning warcraft and wisdom. I trained with obsidian knives in the courtyard, but also sat cross-legged beside scribes, reciting dates and learning glyphs, until my head spun. We used a base 20 number system. Did you know that? Imagine counting fingers and toes. That's where it came from. Historians still argue whether this math came from daily life or celestial observation. But one thing's clear. We weren't just stacking stones, we were stacking ideas. Our calendar was famous, sacred, intricate, intimidating. We didn't just track years, we tracked cycles of existence. We had the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar, and the Tsokian, a 260-day ritual calendar. They meshed together in perfect synchronicity to create the calendar round, a 52-year sacred loop, and above it all, the long count. It didn't just measure time, it measured destiny. I remember one particular afternoon. I was maybe 11. I'd just lost a ceremonial knife during practice and was sulking behind a temple column. That's when my father found me. He didn't scold. He just sat down beside me, watched the light shift on the stone walls, and said, "Tessic, a knife is sharp because it knows its shape. A chief must be sharper." That was his way, teaching with riddles. I understood later. He meant I needed to know myself before I could lead anyone else. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really did. Despite the burden of my lineage, there were wonders in my childhood. Festivals where the city bloomed with music, sacrifices that terrified me, but which everyone said were necessary to keep the world spinning. Dances and golden masks, corn beer poured in rivers, ball games so intense the crowd would stop breathing between plays. We had it all. Art, agriculture, astronomy, architecture. Our people cultivated hundreds of crops, carved jade with impossibly fine tools, and built roads Zakbiba, stretched 4 miles, glowing white under moonlight. And yet, behind the pageantry, something else always stirred: tensions. The priesthood in White Flame was fractured. 2 rival houses argued constantly over the interpretation of omens. One favored offerings of incense and song, the other blood and spectacle. I was too young to understand the full depth of their power games, but I remember the way my father's jaw would tighten when certain priests approached. "Too many gods," he muttered once, half under his breath. "Too many mouths feeding on fear." Historians still argue whether Maya religion unified or destabilized society. For every ritual that brought people together, there was another that stirred unrest. If you read a different prophecy than your neighbor, whose future do you believe? And then there were the outsiders. Traders from far cities, warriors with foreign tattoos, messengers from the West bringing gossip and threats wrapped in smiles. My father always welcomed them, offered gifts and feasts. But behind closed doors, he told me, a smile without a shadow is just a mask. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I would. We'd heard of cities falling, of droughts, of kings gone mad with visions, of ball courts flooded with blood. But in White Flame, the maze still grew, the rivers still flowed, the stars still gleamed above our observatories. It was easy to believe we were immune. Spoiler, we weren't. One last memory before I leave this part of the story behind. The kind that hits different when you know what's coming. My father and I stood atop the Sun Temple at twilight. He held a carved obsidian disc in one hand, letting the last light catch its surface. He said, "All light fades, Tech, but it doesn't vanish. It returns in another cycle, another name." At the time, I rolled my eyes. I was 15, hungry, and more interested in my crush down in the plaza than in poetic riddles. But now those words feel carved into my ribs, because that was the city of the sun, my home, my world, and it was already slipping into shadow. The first time I held the calendar stone in my hands, It felt heavier than stone had any right to be. Not just in weight, but in meaning. Cold, smooth, and edged with layers of glyphs that rippled across its surface like water frozen in time. Each mark, a whisper. Each groove, a drumbeat of something ancient. I was 12. The day was marked 7 Ajah, a sacred day, a day of prophecy and reckoning. My tutor was Itsum, an elderly priest with a voice like dry papaya skin and a temper even drier. He didn't believe in gentle explanations. He believed in glyphs, discipline, and the power of silence. "This," he rasped, tapping the stone with one long yellowed nail, "is not just a calendar. It is the heartbeat of the universe. No pressure, right?" Understanding the Maya calendar wasn't easy, even if you were born into it. The priest spent decades memorizing combinations of days, gods, numbers, celestial movements, and me. I was a boy who barely remembered what he ate for breakfast, but something about it stuck. Maybe because it felt like a puzzle with a soul, a maze of symbols and patterns that somehow lined up with the sun, the moon, the stars, or very life. Here's a fact. The Maya believed in cycles of creation and destruction. Time wasn't linear. It was circular, coiling like a snake swallowing its own tail. They believed we lived in the fourth world, the fourth great creation, and that each previous world had ended in cataclysm. Floods, fires, darkness. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from real natural disasters or pure mythology. But for us, it didn't matter. Stories were truth. And time. Time was a god you could disappoint. We had 3 main calendars. I know it sounds excessive, but hear me out. First was the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar. Think of it like our version of the year 18 months, of 20 days, plus a 5-day unlucky period known as Waib. During Waib, people avoided travel, didn't eat hot food, and definitely didn't get married. Some believed the boundaries between our world and the spirit realm grew thin. Spirits could reach out and duck grab. It was like the haunted week of the year. One time, I tried sneaking out during Waib, just once. My mother caught me and made me bathe in chili pepper water to burn away the spirits. I wouldn't recommend it. Then there was the Tukan, the 260-day sacred calendar. This one ran in cycles of 20 named days, combined with 30 numbers. It told you the energy of a day, like spiritual weather. It was used to name children, pick dates for ceremonies, and even predict your personality. If you were born on 1 Ben, you might be a traveler. 5 Cain, you might attract wealth, ... or snakes, or both. And finally, the long count, the big one. This calendar tracked the number of days since the mythical beginning of the current world August, 1131-14 BC. Yeah, you heard that right. Before pyramids in Egypt, before Stonehenge, the Maya were already tracking epic time. Now here's the juicy bit. The long count is what caused all that 2012 apocalypse hype. You remember that, right? The world was supposed to end on December 21st, 2012. Spoiler, it didn't. But the reason people thought it would is because the long count completed a major cycle the day of which is 144,000 days. It was the 13th Bakhtin, and 13 is a sacred number. The end of one Bakhtin often marked transformation, not necessarily destruction. But if you're a modern writer with a movie to sell, the world ends sounds way more exciting than cultural reset. Historians still argue whether the Maya truly believed the world would end at the Tigablas Th Baktun, or if it was simply the end of a chapter, like flipping to a new page in a cosmic book. To us, Maya, time wasn't scary. It was sacred, predictable, alive. One day, I asked Itsum if we can measure time. Can we stop it? He stared at me for so long I thought he didn't hear. Then he smiled, one of the few times he ever did. No, but you can listen to it. And sometimes you can step out of its way. It didn't make sense to me then, but I've held on to that idea ever since. That time, if you pay close attention, might tell you when to move and when to stand still. I spent a lot of afternoons beneath the steely tall stone markers carved with dates and events, each one like a history book in the shape of a monument. The kings were all there, frozen mid-victory, their deeds immortalized in stone, their conquests and ceremonies carved in glyphs that would outlive us all. One of my favorites was the story of a king who supposedly summoned lightning from the sky to burn his enemies. It was probably metaphorical. Probably. But maybe not. The Maya pantheon was full of gods of weather, war, and fire. Chalk, the rain god, could crack open the heavens with an axe. Itzamna, the sky god, was said to breathe stars. Our myths weren't gentle. They were alive, dramatic, and frequently terrifying. And our kings. They weren't just rulers. They were divine conduits. To lead, you had to bleed. Ritual bloodletting, piercing tongues, ears, or more. Delicate place was seen as a way to feed the gods and open visions. Yes. Ouch. One fringe theory I once heard from a traveling priest, definitely not officially, faked visions to maintain control. They knew when eclipses were coming, thanks to our astronomical calculations, and used them to manipulate fear. Imagine that? Political theater, but cosmic. Historians still argue whether kings used astronomy to inspire awe or obedience. Either way, when the moon ate the sun, people trembled, and the king painted in blood, and mystery stood tall. All this, all this complexity of time and myth and blood, was the world I was meant to inherit. I was being trained not just to lead, but to interpret the universe, to hear the gods in the wind, see omens in the stars, and remember every face carved into the stone of our ancestors. It was beautiful, terrifying, sacred, and it was starting to unravel. Because no matter how many calendars we had, no matter how many Bactans we tracked, no one, not the priests, not the kings, not even the stars saw what was coming next. The smell of roasted cacao always takes me back. Back to the marketplace of white flame, where steam rose from earthen mugs, and the buzz of gossip hovered just beneath the cries of traders. The rich, bitter scent clung to your skin. If you've never had hot chocolate with chili, honey, and ground maize, you haven't truly lived. Maya cacao wasn't a dessert, it was status, ceremony, and sometimes straight-up currency. My father once paid a stonemason 5 cacao beans for carving a new glyph into the palace lintel. 5 beans. For a week of labor. I remember thinking the mason got robbed until he smiled, cracked the beans open, and said they tasted sweeter when earned. That was life in white flame, a place of strange priorities and sacred pleasures. One of my earliest memories is of feathers, specifically quetzal feathers, vivid green, shimmering like emerald fire, longer than my arm. The royal bird, sacred, almost impossible to catch without harming. We never killed them. Instead, skilled birdcatchers would wait for the molting season, then climb into trees for hours to harvest shed feathers. A single plume could buy a small house. Those feathers danced everywhere during festivals, adorning priests, warriors, musicians, even children. They shimmered as we moved, catching light like living jewels. Once, I saw a warrior returning from battle with one braided into his hair. He hadn't earned it. And when the elders found out, they made him wear a headdress of turkey feathers for a year. Not as glamorous. We were fancy, but not foolish. Now, let's talk about jaguars. The most feared, most revered animal in our world. Strong, silent, invisible, until it wasn't. To wear a jaguar pelt was to channel its spirit. But unlike feathers, jaguar skins came with blood. Only the elite rulers, priests, and the most decorated warriors wore them. It wasn't just fashion, it was identity. My father had one. He wore it only during the rain-calling ceremony. He said it helped him speak to the bones of the sky. I didn't understand that, but the way the fur draped over his shoulders, he looked like he could command thunder. Historians still argue whether jaguar worship stemmed from real animal encounters or something more symbolic. But trust me, when you hear one roar in the dead of night, it feels spiritual, and a little like your soul is trying to crawl out of your chest. Luxury in Maya society wasn't what you'd expect. We didn't flaunt gold like some other ancient empires. Our wealth was measured in jade, obsidian, cacao, and knowledge. Jade, the sacred green stone, was more valuable than gold. It symbolized life, breath, and the gods' favor. I once held a carved jade pendant that had belonged to a queen. It was warm, like it remembered being worn. Then there was obsidian black volcanic glass, razor sharp, almost invisible when it cut. We used it for everything from tools to mirrors to weapons. My first knife was obsidian. I named it Whisper, because that's all it took to open skin. Quirky fact: some elite Maya filed their teeth into points and inlaid them with jade. For beauty, I once saw a noble smile and nearly screamed. It looked like he had a mouthful of glittering fangs. But the ladies loved it. We also had an odd obsession with heads, specifically shaping them. Nobles often flattened their babies' skulls by binding boards to their heads during infancy. It wasn't seen as Horenfuja's stylish. A long, sloping forehead was considered beautiful, divine. Eva, the shape resembled corn, and corn was everything. The Maya didn't just eat corn, we worshipped it. Our creation story said humans were made from maize dough. The maize god was central to our pantheon, dying, sprouting, rising again. Our entire society was seeded with this belief. You weren't just raised on corn. You were corn. We lived with texture, with richness, from the way our textiles were dyed with crushed cochineal beetles to the intricate murals on our palace walls. Every detail. A color wasn't just a color. It was an offering, a message, and sound. Ooh! The soundscapes of white flame, flutes made of bone, drums skinned from deer, shell trumpets echoing down the causeways. Music was not for background, it was for calling gods. I still remember a wedding where the musicians played so hard, one of them passed out, collapsed mid. Everyone thought it was a divine sign. Turned out he just hadn't eaten. We fed him tamales and carried on. The gods, presumably, were amused. Speaking of food, tamales? Yes, but also turkeys, beans, squash, avocados, and even dogs. Yeah, we ate dogs. Not all the time, and only certain breeds raised for it. My grandmother once told me dog stew helped with prophecy dreams. I passed. We drank Bulch, a mildly alcoholic drink made from fermented tree bark. Not delicious, but it got the job done. And cacao was sacred. We didn't sweeten it with sugar, we added chili, maize, and sometimes blood. Sacrificial cacao. Because what's more intense than sipping hot chocolate while honoring the gods of the underworld? Modern historians still argue whether cacao's widespread use was daily or ceremonial only. Based on my experience, both. My mother drank it every morning. My father only during rituals. I drank it when no one was looking. All of this, the feathers, the chocolate, the skull binding, the jade teeth, was normal to us. Not weird. Not extreme, just ours. And beneath it all ran this unshakable belief that every choice, every flavor, every stitch in cloth mattered. Not just in this world, but in the next. Life and afterlife were braided together like fibers in a rope. You didn't just eat, or dress, or speak for yourself. You did it for your ancestors, your descendants, your gods, which made life a lot more complicated and a lot more beautiful. Looking back, I think the Maya world was like a tapestry, densely woven, glittering with sacred threads, but also stretched so tight it could tear with the wrong tug. And the seams were starting to fray. There were whispers of drought in the west, of cities like Dos Pilas devouring themselves in civil war, of priests disagreeing more violently, of too many temples and not enough rain. But we danced anyway. We wore our jaguar pelts and drank our bitter cacao and told each other it was just a phase, that the gods were testing us, that the rains would come. They didn't. The first time I climbed the observatory tower alone, I thought the stars might swallow me. It wasn't the high tide scaled the pyramid steps 100 times. It was the silence. Up there, above the smoke of hearth fires and the chatter of the plaza, the world faded into sky. The wind carried no sound. The stars blinked slowly, like ancient eyes watching. I stood barefoot on the stone platform, shivering a little in the breeze, holding a thin obsidian slate and a handful of crushed red ochre for marking. The stars above curved gently, slowly, predictably until they didn't. Because once you learn to read the stars, you also learn to fear them. Our city had an EG group, a specific type of astronomical structure common in Maya cities. They were aligned to the sun's solstices and I never understood why they were called EG by scholars. That part came much later. But to us, they were sacred platforms, places to measure the breathing of the cosmos. Each season had its alignment. When the sun rose over the corner of one structure, it signaled planting time. When it fell behind another, it was time to prepare for the harvest or the war season. My teacher, a quiet stargazer named Yax, believed the stars spoke truths more honest than any priest. "The gods lie," he once muttered over a cracked lunar chart. "But the planets do not." Historians still argue whether the Maya truly believed the stars were deities, or if they merely understood celestial mechanics through a spiritual lens. But standing in that cold air, watching Venus rise like a drop of fire, it was hard not to believe something divine was up there. Yax taught me the Venus cycle, 580, 4-day pattern of visibility. The planet's appearance and disappearance in the sky marked key military and religious events. Entire wars were planned around Venus, rising as the morning star. One glyph from a city to the south described a battle launched precisely on 5 Lamont, the date of a Venus return. They believed that under Venus, kings bled more. Was it superstition? Strategy? Science? Maybe all three. The Maya didn't separate them the way we do now. To us, the cosmos wasn't up there, it was everywhere. Reflected in lakes, mimicked in temple layouts, woven into textiles. We didn't just observe the stars, we echoed them. Atop the observatory tower, I traced constellations I'd memorized since I was a child. The 3 Hearthstone's 3 stars in Orion's belt, said to be the foundation of the world. The Milky Way, which we believed to be a cosmic river, or the road of souls. When it stretched across the sky in certain seasons, the dead were said to walk. That night, it was overhead, bright, hungry. I made notes on the obsidian slate, marking the positions. My hands shook a little, not from cold, but from knowing I was now doing what my ancestors had done. Watching, waiting. We had no telescopes, no calculators, just eyes, memory, and architecture. Yet our measurements of lunar and planetary cycles were shockingly accurate. Even now, archaeologists are baffled by how close we got without modern instruments. One temple I visited later in life had windows that perfectly framed the setting sun on the exact day of the equinox, year after year after year. It wasn't a fluke. It was obsession, the kind that carved entire cities into stone calendars. One quirky legend Yax told me, and he always swore it was true, involved a king who tried to build a second moon. Apparently, this ruler believed the original moon had become too jealous, too powerful. He thought a rival in the sky would balance her influence. So he gathered his best architects, carved a massive stone sphere, and launched it from a pyramid using an enormous wooden ladder. It fell on his palace. Nobody tried that again. But the idea that humans could add to the heavens, that stuck with me. Sometimes I wonder if all this stargazing was our way of finding meaning in chaos. When crops failed, or floods came, or kings betrayed their people, maybe we looked up not to understand, but to escape. Still, we trusted the sky. It was predictable. Not like people. In the final years before everything fell apart, the sky started to shift. Not literally, but symbolically. Omens grew stranger. Priests reported unusual eclipses. Comets were seen as smoking stars, harbingers of death. And when Venus disappeared early one season, people panicked. I watched my father grow quiet. He would stare at the sky without speaking, as if trying to decode something the rest of us couldn't see. One night, he called me to the tower. "You see that?" he asked, pointing at a faint flicker near the horizon. I nodded. "That shouldn't be there," he whispered. "It's early. What does it mean?" He didn't answer. Historians still argue whether the Maya collapse was due to natural events like drought and famine, or internal ones like political strife and overextension. But in our world, the two were never separate. A failed harvest wasn't just nature, it was divine judgment. And the stars, they were the gods' warning system. So, when patterns changed, everything changed. One final story before I descend that tower. I once saw an eclipse while lying in a canoe on the river. The sun turned to smoke, and the wind stopped. Even the birds went quiet. The priests screamed. The people wept. But me, I floated in silence. The water was warm, the air still. And for one moment, it felt like the whole world had forgotten to breathe. I think that's when I first sensed it, that something was ending, that we'd built towers to read the heavens, but we'd forgotten how to listen to the earth. The temple vaults always smelled of dust and crushed flowers, not the sweet kind, but the dry, papery kind you find long after the petals have given up trying to bloom. It was a scent that clung to your robe, your hair, even your dreams. The kind of scent that told you time itself had been sitting here too long. Only a few people were ever allowed inside. Scribes, priests, and sons of chiefs if they were deemed ready. I wasn't, but I went anyway. It started with a whisper, not from a person from a door. I had followed one of the junior scribes into the rear chamber of the temple during a rain ceremony. The scribe was in a rush, balancing tablets and dried ink cakes on a wooden tray, and hadn't noticed me shadowing him like a fox. The door was carved from red cedar, smooth with age, etched with glyphs I didn't recognize, but I felt them, like my skin did, even if my eyes couldn't. When it creaked open, the smell hit me first. Dust, ash, flowers, and something else. Something older. The vaults were like a maze carved into the heart of the temple. Stone corridors coiled downward, narrowing until the light of torches barely reached. Walls lined with painted codices, stacked bark paper scrolls, offerings sealed in clay pots. Every breath I took felt like it disturbed 100 years of silence. I passed a basin filled with dried blood. Ritual or storage, it was hard to tell. Then I heard voices, not whispering, exactly more like debating, a heated murmur of disagreement. 3 priests in the chamber ahead, arguing quietly over something. I crouched behind a statue of chalk, a rain god, and listened. "The calendar is wrong," one said. "Not wrong. Misread," the second corrected. "Then why hasn't the rain returned?" asked. The third. Their words tumbled like water through cracks, just enough for me to catch key phrases. The glyph of collapse, prophecy of the fifth serpent, misalignment of Venus, and then the sharpest phrase of all. The aha must not know. My heart stuttered. They were hiding something from my father. Something about the calendar. Something about us. Historians still argue whether Maya priests manipulated prophecy for political control. It's possible, but in that moment, I didn't think they were scheming. I thought they were scared. They had seen something in the numbers, in the stars, in the cycles. Something that told them this wasn't just a bad season or a missed offering. Something bigger, something permanent. I didn't understand all the terms they used, but I understood tone. And I understood what it meant when the most powerful men in the city whispered like frightened boys in the dark. I crept backward, careful not to bump the statue. The eyes of chalk seemed to follow me. Back in the upper corridors, the festival sounds returned. Drums, shell horns, laughter, life. But now it all felt thinner, like the veil between worlds had frayed. I didn't tell anyone what I heard. Not my mother, not even my father, especially not my father, because the last time he'd ignored a priest's warning, it had cost him the eastern fields and a dozen farmers with them. And besides, something about that chamber had changed me. A few nights later, I snuck back. Alone. I brought a torch. This time, and gloves, to move scrolls, without leaving oils from my hands. That's what Yax had taught me. Don't touch history like it's yours. I found the codex. It had been left out, clumsily, rewrapped in cloth. Maybe the priests had been too shaken to store it properly. Maybe the gods wanted me to read it. The glyphs were ancient, older than our city, maybe older than any city. They spoke of a serpent swallowing the sun, a time when rivers would vanish, when cities would forget their own names, a time of drought, of fire, of division. One section caught my eye, a figure royal, crowned and thorns bleeding into the mouth of a jaguar. Around him, glyphs for earth, sky, and hunger. I copied it onto a scrap of bark with a lump of charcoal. It felt wrong to take it, but I couldn't forget it. That image, that message. The next day, I showed it to Yax. He went pale. This hasn't been seen in generations, he whispered. Is it a prophecy? He shook his head. It's a warning, one that was buried because it came true. Once before. That's when he told me about the city with no name, a ruined place deep in the southern jungle, known only in legend. It had grown too fast, worshipped too loud, spilled too much blood. Then the rain stopped, and the priests read the stars wrong, and the people turned on each other, he said. The jungle swallowed the city like it had never existed, but the glyphs survived, he murmured. They always do. A few days later, I asked my father about the vaults. He frowned. Stay out of that place, Tessic. But it's not meant for boys, or kings, or anyone who wants to sleep peacefully again. That was the last thing he said on the subject. I started dreaming of fire. In the dreams, white flame burned, and the jaguar with the bleeding mouth laughed as it prowled the ruins. The stars fell like teeth, and a voice kept whispering in my ear. The calendar is broken. Historians still argue whether Maya prophecies were fatalistic or metaphorical. But when your dreams start matching forbidden codices, you stop arguing. I tried to act normal. I practiced my spear drills. I drank cacao with my mother. I held my wife's hand beneath the cotton trees. But in the back of my mind, the glyph of collapse pulsed like a wound. I started counting days, watching shadows, listening for thunder that never came, and waiting because something was coming. Something not even the gods could stop. We called it POK-TA-POK. The game of life and death. If you ever stood inside the stone walls of the ball court, truly stood there, barefoot on the hot limestone, between two towering vertical hoops, with the whole city watching you, would understand why it wasn't just a game. It was a stage, a ritual, a negotiation with the gods, played out with sweat and bruises instead of prayers. We called it POK-TA-POK. The game of life and death. If you ever stood inside the stone walls of the ball court, truly stood there, barefoot on the hot limestone, between two towering vertical hoops, with the whole city watching you, would understand why it wasn't just a game. It was a stage, a ritual, a negotiation with the gods, played out with sweat and bruises instead of prayers. The rules were simple. 2 teams, a solid rubber ball the size of a human head, and no hands or feet allowed. Only hips, elbows, and knees could touch the ball. Get it through the ring. You win. But it wasn't about winning. Not really. I had trained for poked hockey since I could walk. My father believed the game taught discipline, that every thud of the ball against the wall was a reminder of life's rhythms. I wasn't our city's best player. Not by far, but I could hold my own. The day of the tournament was blistering, a celebration of some long-dead ancestor's coronation. If I remember right, half the city was in the plaza. Faces painted, bodies packed, shoulder to shoulder. The priests burned incense from every corner, and the drums thumped like a heartbeat about to burst. And there I was, shirtless, oiled, nervous. My wife sat near the front, cheeks flushed from the sun, her hand resting on the slight curve of her belly. I played that day like the gods were watching, because they were. There's a debate among historians over whether the losing team or the winning team was sacrificed. Some evidence suggests winners offered themselves for glory, while others argue losers paid with their lives. From my own experience, it depended on the context. This was not one of those games. No one was going to die. Probably. Mid-match, I caught a glimpse of a stranger in the crowd. Tall, wearing black, markings I didn't recognize inked into his arms. He watched the game, but not like a spectator, more like a scout. When the ball slammed into my ribs moments later, knocking me flat, I forgot all about him. Poke-to-poke was brutal. The ball could shatter bones if you misjudged the angle. I once saw a boy dislocate his hip and smile through it, just to stay on the court. That's what pride could do to you. We lost that match. Barely. My teammate missed a deflection by inches, and the other side whooped like they'd conquered a kingdom. No one was sacrificed, but we were offered cleansing, smoke, salt. A priestess whispered blessings over us like she was patching cracked pottery. Still, something felt off. The stranger had vanished. No trace. And that night, as I sat beside my wife rubbing her tired feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game hadn't ended, just paused. I later learned that ball courts weren't just for sport. They were cosmic theaters. The game symbolized the battle between life and death, sun and moon, order and chaos. One of our oldest myths tells of the hero twins, divine brothers, who descended into the underworld to play puck-to-puck against the gods of death. Through cleverness and courage, they won not just the match, but resurrection. They became the sun and the moon, rising and setting forever. It's said that every game is a reenactment of that myth. Every player, a stand-in for gods, no pressure. One odd tradition. Sometimes we placed skulls around the court's edge. Real ones from past players, enemies, or sacrifices. It was a reminder that history watched your every move. That failure had a face. I used to find that grim, but after seeing how easily the world could shift under your feet, I started to understand. Bones are honest. They don't lie. After the tournament, I returned to the temple vault. Yax had copied the collapse glyph onto fresh bark, comparing it to others from distant cities. He looked more tired every day. His hands shook. His food went uneaten. "What if we're playing the game wrong?" He asked me once. "What game?" "Life," he said. "The world." I didn't have an answer. "Still don't." One morning, a messenger arrived from the west. A delegation from a rival city requested an audience. They came bearing gifts: obsidian, quetzal feathers, bundles of cacao wrapped in embroidered cloth. My father smiled, accepted their offerings, and held a feast. But his eyes never smiled. He told me to keep my weapon close. That night, I sat beside the ball court alone. The moon hung low. The hoops cast narrow shadows on the stone, and I thought about how easy it would be to bleed into those shadows and vanish. How the hero twins had defeated the underworld by tricking death into believing they were bones. How every ritual, every prayer, every calendar line might just be us trying to bounce a ball through a ring while the gods looked on, mostly bored, occasionally amused. Historians still argue whether the Maya saw themselves as pawns or players, whether we believed fate ruled us or that we could shape it. But I know this much: when you stand in the court and the world goes quiet, and the ball comes at you faster than thought, you stop caring what the scholars say. You play. And if you're lucky, you live to tell the story. I did, for a little while longer. I still remember the way her hair smelled after rain, like crushed hibiscus and warm bark. It's funny what your memory holds on to when the world starts falling apart. Not the temple carvings or sacred dates, but little things, soft things. Her laughter when I tripped on a ceremonial robe. The way she always stole the last cacao bean. The way she used to sing to a belly, like the baby could already hear and remember. Her name was Exchel, named after the goddess of love and fertility. It suited her. Not because she was gentle, though she was, but because she had that kind of strength that looks soft until it doesn't bend. The kind of strength that makes you believe the world still has a center, even when it's clearly breaking. We were married on the last lucky day of the Tucan cycle, in a ceremony small by city standards, but rich in meaning. Flowers were woven into our hair. Elders chanted under a canopy of smoke. My mother cried. My father stood solemn beside me, a hand on my shoulder, his other gripping a staff carved with our family's glyph. That night, as we lay on a mat of woven cotton under the stars, she whispered, "If our child is born on an unlucky day, we'll name them anyway. We'll make it lucky." I laughed, but something in her voice stayed with me. We'd heard more rumors by then. Cities to the south closing their gates, water sources drying, priests blaming it on misaligned rituals. The maize harvest had been thin, the rivers murky, the moon hung lower in the sky, and people had begun to murmur things they wouldn't say aloud before. That the gods were angry, that the calendar was broken, that the Ahamai father wasn't doing enough. Historians still argue whether the collapse began with the weather, with politics, or with belief itself. But belief is fragile. Once one crack forms, it spreads. Exchel told me one night, as we watched fireflies blink over the dry fields, that she'd had a dream. "I was standing on the temple steps," she said, "and everyone was gone. The city was silent. Even the birds." Then I looked down, and I was holding two things: her baby and a knife. I reached for her hand. She was shaking. The gods weren't angry. She whispered. They were waiting. She was 3 months pregnant when the rain stopped completely. White Flame had known dry seasons before, of course. That's why we built reservoirs, canals, and cholchins, those bottle-shaped underground cisterns, for storing water. Ingenious, really, but this time was different. The cholchins were already low. The priests said it was a test. Some said it was a punishment. Still, my father led as he always did, measured, calm, deliberate. He increased offerings, built new altars, gave blood, even fasted for 7 days, which left him so weak he collapsed during the lunar ritual. I carried him home that night. I asked him if he thought the gods had turned away. He didn't answer. It wasn't all doom. Life continued sort of. Children played. Vendors sold tamales in the plaza. Ball games were held with slightly less enthusiasm. People smiled, but not with their eyes. My wife and I built a nursery. Just a simple one. Painted glyphs of hummingbirds and maize gods on the wall, she sang while she worked. I tried to carve a toy jaguar from wood and ended up with something that looked like a nervous dog. We laughed. For a moment, it felt normal. But then the stranger returned. Same man I'd seen at the poke-to-poke game. Tall, dressed in black, markings foreign to our city. He came as part of a diplomatic visit from a city we'd never heard of. No gifts this time, no smiles, just cold eyes and silence. My father met with him in private. Afterward, his hands trembled. They want access to the Eastern Aqueduct, he told me. But that's... I said no. That night, the stranger vanished, and I started keeping my spear next to the bed. Exgel's belly grew round. She moved slower, held her back more often. But she still smiled, still hummed, still reminded me to eat when I forgot. She said the baby kicked strongest during rain prayers. We began making a small altar in our room. Nothing big, just a place of protection. She placed a red string there. I didn't ask what it meant. I trusted her magic more than the priests. One day, we received word that 2 allied cities had stopped responding to messengers. Another had burned. No explanation. Still, the temple drums beat every morning. Still, the sun rose. Still, we hoped. But hope started to feel like climbing steps that never ended. One evening, I sat beside Ixtil while she slept, her hand resting on her belly. I thought of the hero twins again, of how they descended into the underworld to save the world above. And I wondered if the real story wasn't about gods or tricks or sacrifice. Maybe it was just about love, about doing the hard thing, even when no one is watching, even when the court is empty, and the stars are gone, and the gods aren't answering anymore. I leaned close to her ear and whispered, I promise, no matter what happens, I'll protect you. And them. She stirred, smiled, whispered back, I know. Of course, I didn't know then that my promise would be tested the very next night, that the torches would flicker with unfamiliar shadows, that the silence would split with screams, that the blood would come again, hot and fast, and that my world would burn, just as the priests once warned. But that is the story of what came after. It started with a scream. Not the kind of scream you hear in battle or pain, but the kind that comes when someone sees the end and can't believe it's real. I was asleep, beside Exco. The night was warm. Her hand curled against my chest, the slow rhythm of her breath syncing with mine. For once, I felt peace. And then, the scream. Then another. Then, fire. By the time I reached the window, the eastern quarter of white flame was already burning. Orange light lit the rooftops. People ran barefoot through the streets, clutching children, pulling elders, shouting names lost in the crackle of flames. I turned to Extil. She was already awake, already moving. The baby, she whispered. We didn't grab anything but each other. They came from the jungle. Shadow walkers, faces painted black, voices sharp with a dialect I didn't recognize. Not traders, not pilgrims, not neighbors. These were invaders. They moved with precision, burning storehouses, killing guards, targeting leaders. Not a raid, a message, and the message was, we end in you. I found my father in the temple courtyard. He was already bleeding. Not dead but close. His headdress torn, his staff snapped. Around him, loyal guards lay still, blood soaking the white limestone. He looked up at me with one eye swollen shut. Tessak, he rasped. They want the water, the vault. Zakodisis. He coughed hard, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Protect her. Protect them. Don't avenge me. Outlive me. I gripped his hand, the calluses familiar, even as they trembled. Then I heard the shout behind me. They'd found us. I ran, not away, not yet. I fought, for a while, long enough to drag my father to cover, long enough to cut through two of them before I realized I was outnumbered. Outarmed, and Exgiel was alone. I found her near the edge of the plaza, clutching a curved blade she'd never been trained to use. She had cut one of them. His arm dangled uselessly at his side. She stood between him and a girl I recognized from the kitchens. A second attacker circled behind her. I don't remember what I screamed, but when it was over, both men were down, and my hands were shaking. Exgiel looked at me. We have to run. We escaped through the aqueduct. My father had once shown me the secret paslo, Moskova channels carved beneath the city, meant for water, not people, but water had stopped flowing. All that remained was silence and echoes, and in that sill, Reef. My father, my mother, our home, the temple, the vault, all left behind. I asked Exgiel if she was okay. She touched her stomach and nodded. We're still here, she whispered, but White Flame wasn't. Later, we learned the truth. The men who came for us belonged to a rogue faction from a city to the west, a place that had once been a small trade partner, now swollen with ambition and drought. They blamed us for denying them water access, for refusing an alliance. And they'd killed for it. Killed him. My father. The only leader who had kept White Flame whole through drought, prophecy, and pressure. Now gone. Murdered. And I was the last flame still burning. Historians still argue whether Maya city-states fell because of environmental strain, political infighting, or war. But I saw it with my own eyes. It was all three. And now it was personal. We fled deeper into the jungle. No more temples, no more scrolls. Just trees, dirt, and whatever we could carry. I built shelters with palm leaves and mud. I hunted. I kept watch at night. Exgiel never complained. She braided her hair with thorns, painted her face with ash. She said, if they come for us again, let them fear what we've become. And I did change. I stopped being a prince, stopped being a son. I became a hunter, but not for animals, for vengeance. It wasn't a grand plan, just a burning coal in my chest that never went out. I started seeking out survivors, fugees from other fallen cities, rebels, mercenaries, priests cast out for heresy. One by one, I gathered them. We called ourselves the Ember Circle. Small at first, but fire spreads. We didn't fight openly, not yet. We struck in the dark, raided supply lines, freed captured villagers, retrieved stolen glyphs, burned their idols. Every success was a whisper to our enemies. You lit this fire. Now watch it grow. Meanwhile, Exgiel stayed hidden in the jungle with the help of a few loyal families. Her belly swelled. She carved stories into bark scrolls for our unborn child, wrote songs, built little shrines of twigs and flowers. She kept our world alive while I tried to burn theirs down. But revenge is a heavy thing to carry, especially when you're carrying it alone. And I was about to learn. I wasn't alone. One night, while scouting the ruins of a once great city now strangled by Vinzai, found something carved into the stone. A familiar glyph. The glyph of collapse. Next to it, another, cruder, rushed, almost as if written in panic. A warning. The strangers who had attacked us were looking for something. Not just water. Not just land. They were hunting a prophecy. The same one the priests had whispered about in the vault. The same one that linked drought, darkness, and the jaguar's mouth. They believed the key was somewhere in white flame. And I realized they weren't finished. They were coming back. And this time, they wouldn't just take our city. They'd take her, unless I stopped them. The ruins of Copen were eerily quiet. When I arrived, too quiet. Even for a dead city, vines curled through its stone archways, like fingers reclaiming what man had borrowed. Moss painted the temples in streaks of green, and the once grand, steely towering stone monuments, carved with the deeds of kings, stood cracked and lopsided, their faces worn smooth by time and rain. But the silence wasn't just nature, it was fear. I'd heard rumors that Copen still held survivors, that its inner sanctums were protected, that somewhere deep in the temple walls, rebel scholars and astronomers were hiding out, preserving the last scraps of Maya wisdom the flames hadn't touched. I wasn't here to find books, though I was here to find allies. I entered through the southern gate just before dusk, keeping low among the fallen walls. The Ember Circle trailed behind me 7 strong that night. Each had lost something, a family, a city, a god. Now they followed me like smoke follows flame, and even they were uneasy. "This place remembers," whispered Nahau, a former priest turned outlaw. "It knows who built it and who betrayed it." Historians still argue whether Copen's fall was self-inflicted or imposed from the outside. Civil war, drought, bad math. No one knows for sure. But when a city like this dies, it leaves more than bones. It leaves warnings. We stepped lightly. At the heart of the city stood the hieroglyphic stairway, hundreds of glyphs etched into stone steps, detailing the lineage of kings. It looked like a giant's tongue, rolled out to tell a story no one asked for. There, I found them. Not ghosts, not legends, people. Scholars, warriors, midwives, children. The city hadn't died, it had hidden. A man stepped forward, thin as a reed, eyes bright with suspicion. He wore an old scribe's robe, frayed at the hem and smudged with ink. "You're Kone's son," he said. I nodded. "Then we've been waiting for you." His name was Toll, once a rural scribe in Copen, now the reluctant leader of the city's forgotten. He told me that before their king died, before the final rituals had ended in fire, and Ashan order was given, preserve the knowledge, bury the truth, wait for the one marked by the jaguar's mouth. Cliché, I know, but this is Maya. Prophecy, half poetry, half puzzle, all pressure. Toll brought me underground, through carved corridors lined with star maps and time charts, into a chamber filled with codices that smelled like wet bark and mildew. He showed me one scroll in particular, painted not with the usual black and red inks, but with a deep blue. The glyph of collapse, the bleeding jaguar, and beside it, a new figure, a warrior, holding both a baby and a burning spear. Or at least, someone a lot like me. According to the prophecy, the fall of white flame had been predicted. Not just ours, many cities. They were part of a cycle, a cleansing, an end and a beginning. But there was more. A name, scrawled near the base of the scroll, almost an afterthought. Zulek, the Black Star. Toll's voice trembled when he said it. They're not just a faction, Tezek. They're a cult, a movement, believers in collapse. They think the world must burn so a new one can rise. And their next target, Ikusekera. Why her? The prophecy didn't say, but it hinted. A new life, born in the ashes of the old. A child who would carry memory and fire in equal measure. The jaguar's heir. They thought our unborn child was that flame, and they wanted to snuff it out. I staggered back, heart pounding. My first instinct was to run. Back to her, to the jungle where she waited, trusting I would return. Toll placed a hand on my shoulder. You can't do it alone. I've done everything alone. Then it's time to stop. We stayed 3 days in Copen. Not to rest there was no rest but to prepare. To rally. Word spread like wildfire among the ruins. More rebels joined us. Former priests, angry farmers, women who'd hidden their blades beneath their weaving for years. The Ember Circle swelled, became something more, became an army. Or, at least, something that looked like one in the right light. Before we left, I stood once more before the hieroglyphic stairway. Toll handed me a small jade pendant, shaped like a jaguar's tooth. For strength, he said. But I didn't need strength. I needed time. And we were running out of it. That night, a comet streaked across the sky tail, long and red, like a wound opening in the heavens. We took it as a sign, a warning, or a promise, or both. The black star had lit the sky, and the war for the future had begun. We followed the smoke. That's how you find the stolen. Not by tracks or whispers, but by what they burn behind them. 'Tis all. Ek didn't hide their movement. They announced it, village after village, shrine after shrine. Sometimes they took people, sometimes they just left symbols, a black star smeared in ash, or painted in blood. They wanted us to see. They were daring us to chase them. And we did. Our army, if you could call it, that moved through the jungle, like an old song finally remembered. Some of us walked barefoot, some carried tools instead of weapons. But everyone carried rage. Quiet, burning rage. I didn't speak much. My thoughts were on Excel, on her belly, round with the weight of prophecy, on her hands, always warm, even when everything else turned cold. Toll said she was still alive. Scouts confirmed it. She and others from White Flame had been taken to an old city deep in the basin, a place long abandoned. Aksitsa. I'd heard of it once in a scribe's tale. A city swallowed by drought centuries ago. No rivers, no gods, just dust and bones. Tzalek had made it their fortress. We reached it at twilight. At first glance, it looked like a ruin, crumbling walls, toppled steely veins in every crack. But as the sky darkened, torches flickered into view. Too many enchants. Low, repetitive, familiar, and not. Tzalek was there. Hundreds of them, not just warriors, but priests. Women, children, all bound together by belief that this world was ending and that they were chosen to guide its death. We scouted from the ridge above the central plaza. Below, I saw platforms lit with fire, people chained at the edges. Among them, Ikuskeru. She stood taller than I'd expected, hands bound but head high. Even from a distance, I could see she was still carrying. Her stomach full, her eyes defiant, alive. I should have charged in then. Instead, I hesitated. I watched as a tall figure stepped onto the platform. His skin was ash-painted, his arms lined with jaguar scars, a black star etched across his chest. He didn't shout, he raised his hand. The crowd fell silent. Then he spoke. His voice carried like smoke, soft, seeping into every ear. He told them the gods had failed, that the calendars had lied, that the old world had been built on bones and blind devotion, and now the jungle wanted it back, that a new cycle could only begin when the old was completely erased. He raised a knife. The womb must be emptied before it can bear fruit, he said, and he turned toward I don't remember descending the ridge. I only remember the heat in my chest, the way my legs moved on their own, the way my fingers found my spear, and how the jungle seemed to open for me. The Ember Circle followed. There was no battle cry, Just impact. Fire. Meeting. Fire. Quiet rage, turning loud. I reached the platform just as the Black Star priest raised his blade again. His eyes met mine. No fear. Just recognition. "You're too late," he said. I lunged. He moved faster than I expected, dodging, twisting, smiling. His blade nicked my cheek. Mine scraped his ribs. Sparks flew from the fire. Around us. Chaos. Exploded shouts. Steel. Smoke. The crack of bone. But in the middle of it all, Ikusukeru. She had freed herself, somehow. Blood on her wrists. Firelight in her eyes. She found a fallen dagger and stood between the priest and me. "She is the jaguar," he hissed. "Not you." She didn't flinch. Together, we ended him. Not with a grand blow or a clever trap, just a struggle in the dirt. A blade through cloth, a breath cut short. He died, staring at the stars he worshipped, and the chants around us fell quiet. We freed the others. Survivors from White Flame. Children. Elders. Prisoners from other cities we hadn't even heard of. Some had been there for months. Some barely remembered who they were. Toll stood on the edge of the platform, looking down at the defeated. "It's over," someone whispered. But he shook his head. "No," he said. "It's just paused." That night, Excel and I sat under a roof of broken stars. She leaned against me, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes closed. "I knew you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't, but you did." Silence. Then she whispered, "He said our child would change everything." I took her hand. "They already have." Historians still argue whether Oxwitza was ever real. Some say it's a myth, symbol of collapse, not a place. Others claim to have found glyphs, referencing it, buried beneath more famous cities. But I don't need scholars to believe. I was there. I saw it burn. I saw it reborn. And in the middle of it all, a woman with a red string in her hand. A child waiting to be named. A father still learning how to begin again. We moved like shadows through the dead lands. The jungle was quieter now. Not peaceful, just tired. Like it had seen too much fire, swallowed too many cities, heard too many last breaths. The path home, if you could call it that, took us across dry riverbeds and empty fields, once rich with maize. Every so often, we passed the bones of villages' walls without roofs, doorways without doors, and dust. Dust in the air, dust on our tongues, dust in our memories. Excel held my hand tightly as we walked, the baby kicking every now and then, reminding us there was still life in all this death. We passed a city once called Yaxn. It had been grand white stone pyramids, wide causeways, ball courts, carved with feathered serpents. Now, only ruins. The smell of old ash still clung to the walls. We found altars overturned, bones in the streets, glyphs half burned by fire. One still remained, clear as if freshly etched. The broken sky. A glyph not seen in any standard codex. Toll was with us. Then he studied it for a long time, fingers tracing each line like they might reveal a secret. "This is new," he said softly, "or very old. What does it mean?" I asked. He glanced at me, eyes weary. "It means the sky no longer speaks." For the Maya, the sky had always been a conversation. Stars rose and set with meaning. Venus brought war. Eclipses meant sacrifice. Rainbows were omens. The gods didn't shout, they aligned. But here, in this dead city, it felt like the sky had gone silent, and that silence terrified us more than fire ever could. The drought had spread. Rivers we once trusted had dried to cracked mud. Wells sat empty. The cenotes, those sacred sinkholes, we believed were gateways to the underworld had grown still, stagnant. The world was thirsty. We came across a village where people were digging into the earth with their hands, hoping to find water. Just water. Nothing more. One of them looked up at me, a boy, maybe 12. "Do the gods hate us?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. Historians still argue whether the drought that plagued Amaya was a singular disaster, or the result of human choice. Forestation, overfarming, strained resources. Maybe it was all of that. Maybe none. But when the rains don't come, belief cracks. And when belief cracks, so does everything else. Toll gathered the ember circle in the shell of an old temple. He unrolled a scroll, one I hadn't seen before. It was a copy of a foreign glyph, rare and forbidden. It told of a sky rope, a connection between our world and the heavens, and of a time when it would snap. "The drought isn't just weather," he said. "It's the rope unraveling." I looked around. No one scoffed. No one argued. We all felt it. Something had torn. In another ruin, this one barely more than stone teeth rising from the ground, we found signs of ritual gone wrong. Bones scattered in a circle. Glyphs etched hastily, as if the priests had run out of time. A brazier half full of obsidian shards. They had tried to bargain. Failed. I could still smell the desperation. Ik still knelt beside one of the carvings. She brushed away the dirt, revealing the glyph for rebirth twist, reversed, broken in two. "They didn't finish the spell," she murmured. "Maybe they couldn't," I said. "Maybe they weren't meant to!" She turned to me then, placing my hand on her stomach. "Whatever's coming," she said, "we have to meet it whole. Not half grieving. Not half angry. Whole." We kept moving. South, then east, always toward where the maps ended, where even the gods had stopped drawing lines. One night, as we camped under the brittle skeleton of a ceiba tree, the wind shifted. It carried ash again, and something else. Voices, chanting, familiar, but distant. Wrong. We followed it, carefully, past crumbled stone, through fog and thorns, until we saw them. Not Tezalek, a new group, clad in white, faces painted with sun glyphs, as if to mock the darkness. They danced around a pyre, tossing bundles into the fire. I moved closer. Books, codices, scrolls, artifacto, history. They were burning knowledge. Toll's face turned to stone. He tried to rush forward, but I held him back. "There's too many," I whispered. He clenched his fists. "Then we'll come back." Historians still argue over how much Maya knowledge was lost to fire. Some say most of it. Others believe fragments survived, hidden or memorized. But standing there, watching centuries turn to smoke, it felt like watching a soul die, and not for the first time. We retreated. Quietly, carefully, but something shifted in me again that night. I realized this wasn't just a battle for land or lives. It was a battle for memory, for story, for time itself. Because when they burn your history, they can rewrite your future. Ixtel touched my shoulder as we walked back. "We'll teach them," she said. "The child. The others will remember what they tried to erase. And what if we forget? Then we write it in the stars." And for the first time in weeks, I looked up. The stars were dim, faint, some missing, but they were still there, waiting. The calendar was broken. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean we found a slab of massive stone wheeled, deep in the jungle, half buried and cracked straight down the middle like the gods had taken a chisel to time itself. It wasn't from White Flame, or Copen, or anywhere we knew. The glyphs were old. Older than anything Toll had ever seen. They curled in on themselves, looping into unfamiliar shapes. But a few were hauntingly recognizable. Dates, numbers, cycles. Except they didn't make sense. They stopped. The Maya calendar, as you remember, wasn't just one calendar. It was many. A harmony of cycles. Hob Tezokan, the long count. Each with its rhythm, each with its voice. And together, they formed a song that measured everything: birthdays, coronations, eclipses, endings. But this wheel, the song had stopped midway through the verse. No new Bacton, no future count, no predictions, just silence. Toll stared at it for hours. He stopped speaking, stopped eating, just sat beside the broken calendar like a priest at a funeral. "I don't understand," he finally said. "This shouldn't exist." "What is it?" I asked. "It's not just a calendar. It's a record. Someone tried to predict beyond what we thought possible and failed. Or they succeeded," I said, "and didn't like what they saw." Historians still argue whether the Maya really predicted the end of the world in 2012. Most agree it was never an end, just the close of a major cycle, a reset, a new age. But what if, just once, someone tried to look too far? What if they saw this? Not fire from the sky, not floods, but something quieter. Collapse. 1,000 little cracks. Cities falling in silence. Temples eaten by vines. Names forgotten. Stories turned to smoke. Not a bang, just the sound of everything breaking all at once. We made camp beside the wheel. The ember circle slept in shifts. I kept watch that night, not for enemies but for answers. 4 dreams, and I had one. In the dream, I was standing on a pyramid alone, barefoot. The stars were gone, the sky black. Below me, the earth cracked open, swallowing temples, villagers, trees. And from the pit rose the Black Star priest. But his face was my father's. "You broke it," he said. "You let it happen." Then he vanished. And in the silence, I heard the calendar wheel turning backwards. I woke in sweat. The jungle air pressing heavy against my lungs. Exchiel slept peacefully beside me, one hand draped over her belly. The baby kicked. Life, right here, still turning. The next morning, Toll told me he wanted to stay with the wheel. "I've spent my whole life reading time," he said. "Now I want to listen to it." I understood. We left him food. "Inkubakaburang, kukodises." He kissed Ixchel's hand and said to her, "Name the child wisely." We never saw him again. As we moved on, I thought more about time, how we once believed we controlled it, that if we made enough sacrifices, read enough stars, counted enough days, we could predict everything. But maybe the real power wasn't in knowing the end. Maybe it was in choosing how we lived before it. Days passed, then weeks. We helped villages rebuild, dug new wells, taught them what we could, shared stories. People began calling me Aho, but I never took the title. My father had earned it, bled for it, died for it. I wasn't a king. I was a survivor, and a father to be. One village elder asked me why we hadn't rebuilt White Flame. I told him, "It's still burning inside us." He nodded. "Then one day, it will light the world again." Ixchel and I sat under the stars that night. They seemed brighter than usual. Or maybe I'd just been looking down too long. She leaned against me. "Do you think our child will understand?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But even if they don't, they'll remember. Because we will tell them. Because they'll see it in our eyes." She smiled. "I've picked a name." "Oh?" "It's a Nabu. Furinto." I blinked. "Isn't that the sacrificial knife day?" She laughed. "No. It's the day that cuts away what doesn't belong, that clears the old to make way for the new. I looked at her belly, at her face, at the stars above, and I nodded. It's perfect. The calendar may have broken, the sky may have gone silent, but we were still writing, still naming, still remembering, and sometimes that's enough to begin again. We reached Tickle at the edge of morning. Its pyramids rose like sleeping giants from the mist-stone steps, stretching skyward, wrapped in vines and time. Birds called from the canopy above, their cries echoing off ancient walls. It was still, reverent, waiting. The great city had not burned. It had simply stopped. Once the heart of a mighty kingdom, Tickle now stood hollow. No smoke from hearths, no chants from temples, just trees pressing in from every direction, as if the jungle had reached out and closed a fist around it. I'd dreamed of Tickle since I was a child. My father once described it as the place where the gods learned to walk. Seeing it in ruin felt like opening a sacred book to find every page blank extile. Squeezed my hand. "This is where it ends?" she asked. I looked out over the silent causeway. "No," I said, "this is where we decide what begins." We moved through the city like shadows. No resistance, no movement. Just faded murals, fallen lintels, and the whisper of leaves brushing against history. In the main plaza, the great twin pyramids faced each other across an empty courtyard, their stairways steep, their crowns now home to birds, moss, and time. We climbed one, not for ceremony, not for conquest, but because it felt like the right place to speak to the past. At the summit, the wind found us. I looked out over the city, remembering every tale I'd heard of kings like Yikan Chan Kaowil, who once ruled with both sword and star. Hoof wars waged not with steel, but with sky, alignments, and ritual masks, of glory carved in stone and measured in battle. But all of it was gone now, buried, forgotten, or wars written. And that's why I had come, to tell the truth. I brought the codices we'd saved from the vault at White Flame, the ones Toll had copied, the ones Ixchil had carried wrapped in cotton, pressed close to her belly as we ran. I laid them out on the stone floor, and I read them aloud. Not just the glyphs but the stories. The one about the hero twins tricking the lords of Shibal. The one about the maze god dancing into the underworld and returning with new seeds. The one about a city that survived the drought by teaching its people to listen to the sky, not rule it. Ixtiel sat beside me, her hand on her belly. The others gathered around. The Ember Circle. The children we'd rescued. The elders we'd found along the way. Together, we remembered. Then, from the shadows, someone stepped forward. A woman, old, wrapped in embroidered cloth, her face weathered but her spine still straight. She introduced herself as King. Said she had lived in Tickle all her life, had watched it fall, not from fire or war but from silence. The kings stopped listening, she said, to the gods, to the people, to the land. And now, I asked. She smiled faintly. Now I listen to you. She took one of the codices, gently, ran her fingers over the ink, and then she pointed toward a small temple near the edge of the city, one we hadn't explored yet. There is space there, she said. 4 new stories. We followed her. Inside, the walls were mostly blank-worn, smoothed by time and rain. But that was the gift, wasn't it? Space. So we began to carve. Not grand steely, not epic boasts, just truth. Ixtil carved the jaguar. I carved the broken calendar. Others carved suns, rivers, seeds, stars. Children carved their names. Elders added songs. We weren't rebuilding a city. We were planting one glyph at a time. That night, we lit torches in the plaza, not as a ritual, just as a gathering. The air filled with laughter again, quiet, tired, but real. A boy passed around a drum. Someone found a flute, ikuskeru sangu, and for the first time since White Flame fell, I danced. Later, she and I stood beneath the stars. Etzenab kicked hard. She winced, then laughed. "He wants out," she whispered. "He's not the only one." I looked at the sky, at the constellations that had once guided kings, at Venus, just beginning to rise. "The gods haven't left," I said. "No," she agreed. "We just stopped listening." Historians still argue whether Tickle's fall was inevitable, whether any city could survive when its gods go silent. But maybe it's not about survival. Maybe it's about remembering, choosing not to forget, choosing to stay, to listen, to rebuild. Not like before, not with glory and gold, but with stories. And if you listen closely, in the hush between wind gusts, you might still hear us up there, chipping away at stone, telling the truth, Inglis, one mark at a time. The jungle never forgets. Roots split stone, vines drink temples, trees grow over palaces as if to say, "We were here first." But beneath all that, beneath the layers of silence and moss, memory remains. Tickle wasn't our final stop. Not really. Etzenab was born there, beneath the open sky, with the call of howler monkeys and the hum of cicadas echoing through the ruins. He came screaming into a world that had lost its calendar, its kings, and much of its certainty, but not its people. We stayed long enough to teach, to build, to pass on what we knew. And then we moved on. Not because we were chased, but because that's what the Maya do. We move, we adapt, we survive. Long before White Flame burned, cities were already collapsing. Overpopulation, deforestation, soil exhaustion. We had stretched the land too far. Our gods demanded more, and we kept offering. Blood, crops, time. But the rain stopped coming. The rivers shrank, the stars shifted, and the leaders so obsessed with order and cycles and prophecy couldn't hold it all together. Historians still argue whether it was the drought, the wars, the failing crops, or political corruption that caused the fall. They call it the terminal classic collapse, like we all just vanished. But we didn't. We simply moved. Some went north, to the Pook Hills, and the great city of Uzmal. Others deeper into the forest, blending with smaller towns. Many crossed borders we hadn't named yet, following rivers that still ran clear. The cities emptied, yes, but the people lived. They spoke our languages, wove our symbols, named their children with old gods in mind. They married, worked the land, waited, and they're still here. To this day, millions of Maya descendants live across Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador. They speak Yucatec, Quechua, and more. They celebrate festivals older than kingdoms. They carve, paint, farm, pray. They remember. Even if the world forgets. So the end. It wasn't fire, or prophecy, or even betrayal. It was change. And in that change, we didn't vanish. We evolved. I think about this now, sitting beside a small fire at the edge of another village, watching Itzenab draw spirals in the dirt. Ixel hums a lullaby from her childhood. The stars blink above us, quieter than before, but still steady. Someone once said the calendar ended, but maybe it didn't. Maybe it just turned the page. The ember circle, scattered, some settled, Some kept walking. Some vanished into myth. Todos. We buried them beneath a ceiba tree near the coast, wrapped in obsidian and sealed with sap. A time capsule for someone braver. Later, as for me, I never took the title of a how, never rebuilt White Flame, but I carried it in my hands, in my sun, in every story we told around the fire. And one day, when Etsanab is old enough, I'll take him to the ruins, show him the broken wheel, the carved jaguar, the vault where his name was, whispered before he was even born, and I'll say, this is where we ended, and where we began. So maybe the Maya never disappeared. Maybe we just listened too closely to the stars, forgot to listen to the earth until it was too late. Maybe we burned too brightly, too soon, but we lit something, and the embers still glow. Somewhere, deep in the jungle, beneath root and stone, a seed still waits, not for rain, but for remembrance. Sweet dreams.